During most of her time in China, she worked as a nurse because that was the kind of work that the American Baptists had. They had other things, but she was a nurse, so she was working in mission hospitals in Chengdu. That was where she went first and learned Chinese, and then worked there teaching nurses too at the beginning. And then at other terms, she was in other towns, but they were all in the general Chengdu area. In her letters, I see through those years a growing desire to be less tied down to the nursing and the hospital needs, and more being able to go out to villages for a few days at a time with the gospel. And those villages that she wanted to go to would primarily be where she called them the Lolo people, one of the minorities of China. Nowadays, they call themselves Nosu, and the Han Chinese call them the Yi. So if you read something about the Nosu or the Yi, Y-I, that would be the people that Esther Nelson was familiar with and wanting to reach out toward. In 1945, the Swedish Baptist Conference has now become the Baptist General Conference, and they form a mission board. So at that point, she moves over to the denominational mission board of Bethlehem. We're now Bethlehem Church, not First Swedish Baptist Church. And they don't actually, BGC doesn't have any work in China, but that's where she wants to go. So they lend her to the Conservative Baptists, who also are a new mission board at that point. The Conservative Baptists don't have any hospital work, so finally, in her last term, beginning in '47, she's able to do what she's been wanting to do for a long time, which is more directly straight evangelism. And it seems like really ironic timing to me. I'm not going to question God, but she arrives in '57, and she has to leave in, 47, she has to leave in '51. That's the last time she can, she leaves and that's it. She's done with China. She can't go back. So this last term, she's finally getting the kind of work that she's wanted, and it wasn't as if she could work right up till the date she left in '51 either, because the last couple of years it was all kind of iffy of how things were actually working out. So in 1951, the communists force all the missionaries to leave. Some of them are basically deported. Some are required to leave but aren't necessarily given the exit visas they need to leave legally, so they leave illegally, which is sort of what was happening with her and the group she was with. So she, at that point, at the end of her time, she was in a little town called Huili, and there were, she waited because a family named Hannah and George Cole, who had 3 children, were waiting for the birth of their 4th baby before they left. And so she stayed to help them with that. Then they and another couple and 1 or 2 other single women left together in April of '51, sometime in spring, I think it was April. And they had to walk a long way. The women and children might have been carried in chairs part of the way, but it was just a long trek of uncertainty, whether they were going to get stopped, whether there was going to be trouble because they hadn't filled in all the papers they were supposed to before they left, or along the way. So they're trekking to get to a place where they hope they'll be able to get bus transportation, train, and that happens along the way. But along the way, they go through an area where there's a meningitis episode going on with lots of people. Hannah Cole falls ill, and within a day, really just a very short time, dies. They were at a Catholic mission in Fulin, is what the town was called then. Hanyuan is what it's called now. And George and the 4 children can't stay around to mourn for their wife, their mother. They have to keep going. They have to get out. He's got children to think of. And so he left money with the Catholic priest there in the mission where they were to put a monument, to to put a monument where she was buried. And we don't know whether we'll find that again. We have a feeling that it's now underwater where some water's been dammed up or there was a flood. But we'll go to that town and we hope we'll see it. Esther helped care for the baby when they left the country. The rest of the way out there, and that's why she flew back. The rest of the missionaries weren't necessarily flying back, but the mission was wanting to make sure that George and the children in this crisis could get back to their family as quickly as possible. So she flew with them to help out, especially with the baby. Now, most of Esther's story, I'm finding stories from other places, missionary letters of other people that worked with her, for instance. But the core of her story is in letters that she wrote to Bethlehem. She left in 1924. In 1929, a young woman named Elsie Byron came to be the church secretary. She was still working at the church part-time when we came to Bethlehem in 1980. And she was very, very efficient secretary. So every letter that Esther sent to her, to the pastor, to one of the missionary circles, to a Sunday school class, are filed away from Elsie's file. Now, the story how they were saved, I want Carol to come and tell you this. We wouldn't have these letters except for the story Carol's going to tell you about.
Sorry. I started working for Pastor John as his teaching assistant when I was in college, when he taught at Bethel College. And then when he came over to Bethlehem, about 2 years, maybe a year and a half after he got to Bethlehem, I began to work as his assistant in the office. And Elsie at that time was in her 90s. She had worked at the church in the office for over 60 years at that point. And we would play Scrabble every Friday afternoon. At lunchtime, she would whoop me in Scrabble. She could put like one letter in the middle of a whole circle and get 150 points. But Elsie had a closet that was by her desk, and that was full of all of her files. And it reached a point when Elsie was getting a little bit muddled about things. And she would take out some of these letters from Esther, and she would mess them around, and she wouldn't know what to do with them, and she would put them one place, and then she would find them and put them somewhere else. And at the end, I felt like the best thing to do was to just take the box of letters away to preserve it. And so I did that, and I felt sad about that, but I also felt like it was really important for that record, because Elsie kept carbon copies of her letters to Esther too. So there's this correspondence that went on for most of the life of these two women. And I remember Elsie talking to me once about Esther and about whether or not Esther ever wanted to get married. I don't know if this is in one of the letters or it's what Elsie told me. And she said, Esther said, I don't know what I'd do with a man tied to my apron strings.
I want to see how China is different than what I see in her pictures, what she wrote about. A lot is going to be really different. And there are going to be some things that are very much the same. I mean, when I've been there, I've seen the street side noodle sellers that look like pictures in her books. So there are going to be some things that are the same. One thing that I know is really different is the church in China. When the missionaries left, they feared what was going to happen to the faith of the handful of Christians. There hadn't been a huge ingathering of Chinese conversions, and we all know what's happened during those silent years after 1951. The church, the number of Christians is huge. And so we'll be trying to learn something from the church people there. And my favorite dream of this trip is that we'll run into somebody who actually knew Esther. It's getting almost too late for that. Or, we'll have pictures along that somebody might be looking at a picture and say, that nursing student is my grandmother. Something. That would just be fantastic.